All right, welcome everybody. My name is Liz Sparling. As Maureen mentioned, I'm a Board Certified Behaviour Analyst. I live in Victoria, British Columbia on the west coast, a little bit north of Seattle. So I arrived here this morning. I came on the red eye last night and I had a 2-hour nap, so I'm all like pumped up, a little bit hyper, so it's all going to be good. And I tend to speak a little bit quickly anyway, so if I lose you guys, just let me know and I'll try to slow down.
And you're in the south too.
Yeah, I'm in the south, and that's all I need to speak a little bit more slowly. Good. All right. In addition to working with children with ASD and children with developmental disabilities in general, I'm also the parent of a son with autistic disorder and an intellectual disability. He's 18 now. We just finished high school. We're into the transition into adult services. That's a whole other talk. But today we're going to talk about how to motivate children to learn. So how do we get our kids to do the things we want them to do? Anything from the really big ticket items to those small little individual learning opportunities. So we're going to roll on. We will have a break at some point. The more you squirm around, the sooner the break will occur. So that's sort of how it happens. So if you need coffee or water or snacks, just get up and get stuff, and because there's lots. Those cookies look awesome. So absolutely get up and get whatever you need to be comfortable, because suffering's optional. So whatever you need is fair game. But we're going to talk about today, what is motivation? How do we develop it? A framework, we call it kind of a blueprint. I'm going to do some mumbo jumbo ABA talk because I have to, because I'm a behavior analyst, I can't not do it. We're going to talk about symptoms of no motivation, what that looks like, and then we're going to talk about 7 steps to developing motivation via instructional control. But before I really get rolling, I want to get a bit of a feel for sort of who's here. So how many people are parents of a child? Okay. Grandparents? Teachers?
Yay!
Educational assistants? Speech or interventionists or anybody working in the field of cognitive analysis? All right. And can we get a bit of a feel for age groups so I can tailor my stories? So preschoolers, or early school, so let's go kindergarten to grade 5-ish. Teens? All right. Great. Perfect. Now, as I mentioned, we'll look at 2 things. We're going to flip back and forth a little bit. So we're going to talk about those big items and how do we get our kids to do chores and clean up and do all the things that we want them to do. And then how do we teach our little people, so those of you who have preschoolers, how do we work on specific language targets and specific play targets and that kind of stuff? How do we work on those little individualized or smaller skills? So this presentation is going to cover a whole bunch of things today. The PowerPoint, I'm going to make it available to Maureen for her website, so you'll be able to download a copy of it from the website. So we'll do that. So we'll upload it as a PDF, and then you can download it from there. We'll get that organized for you. But let's do a little bit of a quiz first before we get going. All right. So does your work compel you to nag, hover, push, cajole, or overfunction for your child? Anybody guilty of that? Does your frustration cause you to yell, scream, beg, punish, or throw your hands up in the air in despair? I just give up. Never happens. Right. Does your helplessness cause you to start fighting with your spouse, who never seems to do as much as you think he or she should do? Right? And you can always do it better. If you just did it the way you wanted it, it'd be so much better. Anyone in that boat? Right. If you're in any of these scenarios, of course we're not going to be in anything up here. Both are perfect. Right? If you're in any of these scenarios, then you're at the right workshop, because we're going to work on avoiding these conflicts with our kids that we support. Right? Oh, one more. Does your fear about your child's underachieving cause you to keep trying to get him to change and or be more motivated? Fear is a big motivational factor. Fear and guilt. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we kind of go along, especially as a parent, fear and guilt. We'll talk about that as we roll. All right. What is our job? So we know what our job isn't. Our job isn't to hover, our job isn't to nag, our job isn't to, suggest to our significant other that they could be doing something differently. That's not our job. Our job as a parent is pretty simple. Our job is to structure for success. How do we set up our environment to be successful? And we're going to talk about that today. How do we set up our environment to be successful so that we can get the behaviors that we want to occur? Right? If you're asking your child to tidy up their toys, And there's no baskets and no bins and no sort of mechanism for doing that, but somehow we magically think it's going to happen. It's not going to happen, so we can talk about that. If your child isn't getting all his work done, your job as a parent is to hold them accountable. Sometimes I'm a little bit more mature than many of you here, right? And so we noticed over time there's been a bit of a shift, right? There's two parents working. How do we get our kiddos to do the stuff we want them to do in the course of a day? Both parents go to work, we get home at the end of the day, it's time to make dinner, it's time to get this done, we got this extracurricular activity, we got all this stuff to do. How do we get that accountability factor into place? We'll talk about that a little bit today. To give consequences. What if you don't do what you're supposed to do? This is hard. And this is especially hard for our kiddos with developmental disabilities, because you don't want to say, oh, no, I can't give you your very most favorite thing, because you didn't do what I wanted you to do. Right? So we get that into that kind of scenario. And consequences aren't there to create motivation. You give them because you're doing your job as a parent. So we're going to talk about that today too, because a lot of families are like, I don't feel really comfortable about putting a reward into place or putting a reinforcer into place for doing something that the kiddo should be doing. They should just be intrinsically motivated to do it. They should just want to do it. And we're going to talk about why that doesn't happen for typical kids, let alone kids with ASD. And ourselves, we're all a little bit guilty of that kind of stuff too. And your role is to inspire and influence. Our role as a parent, we're part of the environment. If we're structuring for success, then we're part of that environment. So it's not just a physical arrangement. We've got tubs and if you come here, Maureen, it's like overwhelmingly structured, right? I don't know about your house, but my house isn't quite this structured and we get along just fine. But you have to have some sort of structure, and part of that is ourselves and how we respond. Consistent responding to different situations that we find ourselves in. If one day it's okay to do one thing and the next day it's not okay, and then it's not okay again and then it's okay, that's really, really hard for kids to learn what the expectations are and to hold them accountable for that. Okay, what is motivation? Has anyone here had like first year psych kind of courses somewhere along the road? Has anyone here heard of intrinsic motivation? Just something that comes internally. We're just going to let that notion leak out of our head because it's not true. There's no such thing as intrinsic motivation. We can motivate people to do all kinds of stuff. We can motivate them to rise to an occasion like you've never seen, and we can motivate people to do absolutely horrendous things by applying consequences that are horrific to them. But please keep in mind that it's not an intrinsic. Kids don't lack motivation. For us to say, oh, Johnny doesn't want to do that because they don't have any motivation, that's baloney, right? We can develop motivation in any child to learn, and in ourselves as well. We can develop motivation to learn new skills and do whatever. But we don't ever want to use that cop-out of, oh, they don't have any motivation to do it, because that's not true. It's not a trait that's intrinsic to somebody. You don't have brown hair, blue eyes, and motivation. That's not how it works. Motivation is something that we can develop within any learner. All right, we're going to do a little bit of motivation mumbo jumbo. Whenever you see B.F. Skinner pop up, so this is B.F. Skinner. I'm a behavior analyst, and therefore I follow the science of human behavior, or the applied behavior analysis, and B.F. Skinner is like the god of applied behavior analysis, right? Little heavenly bells should ring whenever we hear the word Skinner in my world as a behavior analyst. So anytime we do some ABA mumbo jumbo talk, you're going to see Skinner pop up here. If this is something where you want to go get coffee while Skinner's like popped up there on the screen, that's fine. And come on back when we translate it back into English, that's great too. But I wasn't sure who the audience was going to be tonight, and often we have a mixed crowd, and because some teachers and ABA specialists might be here, I wanted to, cater to them too. So motivation mumbo jumbo. What is motivation? Motivation happens before a behavior. Okay? Motivation isn't, we don't motivate people with rewards. Rewards happen after behavior. Motivation happens before a behavior. Okay? Motivation affects the effectiveness of a reinforcer. Let's think about that for a minute. Affects the effectiveness of a reinforcer. So if I've had 20 cups of coffee, I love coffee. Love it a lot, right? I drink a lot of coffee, probably 3 pots a day, like way too much coffee. But probably at somewhere about the 18th cup, I'm starting to lose a little bit of interest in that, right? I'm not too motivated to do anything that's going to lead to access to coffee anymore. Right? I've become satiated, I call that. Okay. So motivation affects the effectiveness of a reinforcer. It's linked to the reward. If the child wants it, then he or she will likely engage in that desired behavior. Now, we always have a parent that puts up their hand and says, you know, my kid, I could have like the most precious toy ever. They love it, want it, and whatever this demand associated with it is like, not doing it. Does anyone have one of those learners? Yeah, they're great. Or they love it for like 30 seconds, and then they want something else. There's the other kind of thing that we see with a lot of our learners. It'll be like, yep, I'm interested in this, and I'll do something for it for 2 turns, and then, yeah, I don't want it anymore. And so then you're like in your bag of tricks, and you're pulling it out, and you're doing your best, and what can I do? And it becomes like this whole extravaganza, and your Barney comes alive, and what are you doing? Right? We're going to talk a little bit about how that works as well. What causes a child to want that reward? If they don't get it very often. So if they don't get it very often, then they're going to want it. The amount of work they have to do to get it has to be reasonable. If it's too hard, you're not going to do it. And that's what we see with those learners where it's like, oh, look, I've got him, I've got Worry Woo, he's like the best thing ever, right? And you're showing him, and the kid is like, yeah. And it's like, I want you to do this. I want you to say banana, and our kiddo might be just beginning, like an early learner language-wise, and that kiddo's like, forget it, that's way too hard. Right? And so they're like, I'm not saying that. I'm not even going to try to say it, it's too hard. So what we've done there is the amount of work that we've required of the kiddo is too much for the reward, and so they don't respond. Just the perception of the amount of work can prevent kiddos from even trying. Right? If they even think, oh, I don't want to get sucked in there, maybe too much, they'll stop responding. So we see that as well. So it's not even that they have even tried the behavior in the past. They think they might not be successful. They think that the amount of work that needs to be required to get that is too much. Right? So we see that with kids. And when we see that with our learners, then we just need to back up the steps a little bit. So if we get a learner that doesn't even want to try because of fear of failure, we kind of call that, we just kind of put a general label on that. They don't like to be wrong. They have a little bit of fear of failure around that. Then we back up the steps. So we take that bigger task and we break it into smaller tasks, or we provide prompts so that it's errorless learning, so they can't get it wrong. So they encounter the reinforcer, they're like, oh, is that what you wanted me to do? It's like, so it's an interesting way to look at breaking down a bigger task into the smaller things for them. When they get access to the reward, it has to be awesome, right? And one of the other critical factors we want, that reward of the reinforcer that we're providing, we always want to pair it with ourselves. We are the provider of all things fun as parents. We're not just the provider of all things nagging, time to brush your teeth, it's time to go to bed, it's time to have a bath, it's time to whatever. If we're presenting a toy, we want to be involved in that. So it's one thing to control the reinforcers and say, oh yeah, here's Worry Woo guy, here he is, you can have a turn with him. It's more fun if you are interacting with him. Can I think about this? Okay. Right? So it's one thing to give it over to the kiddo and say, here he is. It's another thing to make him come alive. Oh, let's dance with him. I'm not going to do it. People have a scared look on their face. Right? Let's dance with him. Let's do peekaboo with him. Let's tell a story about him. Whatever. If you can make your person involved with the reinforcer, then you become more valuable to your learner or to your child. Right? You become the source of all things fun. And your kiddo is going to want to do the stuff that you've asked them to do because really great things happen when I do that. If you just hand it over and they can entertain themselves, it's like, I don't really need you all that much. I'm good. Get over here. I can just take them in the corner and do my own thing, and that's okay. We don't want that. We want to be the ones that are the source of the fun. We want to be the ones that are associated with the fun because we want our kiddos to do stuff with us because they know the fun's going to happen at the end of that. All right. So let's look a little bit closer at those 3 factors. This is going to sound horrible. We want our kids to be deprived with regards to the toy. Sorry. It scares up there, just bear with it. A little bit of deprivation is okay. All right? It's that coffee scenario that I just talked about. By the 18th cup, I'm not deprived anymore. Right? I don't. First thing in the morning, I'll be doing whatever to get that cup of coffee. Right? Because I'm deprived with regards to it. If I don't have free access to my Thomas the Tank Engine toys, do any of your kids like Thomas big here for, yeah. So if I don't have access to my Thomas the Tank Engine because my mom packs them up into a plastic container instead of leave them all out on the train table every day, Yeah, I'm going to be deprived with regards to those toys, and I'm going to want to gain access to them. You know you're in a state of deprivation if you were to leave your kiddo to their own devices, free access, like go at it, and they were to engage with the toy for 3 hours. If you cut them off at 2 hours, in between 60 and 66%, so about 2/3 of the time, they're going to be in a little bit of a state of deprivation. All right, so anything less than about 2/3 of the free access time would leave them in a state of deprivation. So if you're really, I don't want to say mean, but tough, you go like, you can have Thomas for an hour right now, and then we're going to do some other things, and then you can have Thomas again for an hour, you know, so that your kiddo is really in a state of deprivation with regards to the very most favorite thing. iPads too. iPads seem to be a big thing right now. You can get access to that iPad. It seems to be a big one. So yeah, absolutely you want them to be deprived with regards to access to those things. And its flip is satiation. There is too much of a good thing. If you eat the T-Rex burger with its 14 patties, you'll probably never eat a burger again. Right? There is a point where you get where I don't want it anymore. I don't want Thomas anymore. I've had free access to him. I've had my iPad all day for 8 hours because it was Saturday and it was raining and there's nothing else going on. Right? I'm not going to really want to be doing that anymore. So satiation is the flip side of the deprivation. Once we become satiated, we don't want that toy anymore, or that activity anymore, or that food item anymore. And so that can really affect motivation. If we're using food reinforcers, so sometimes when we work with early learners, so our little people, and we're working on language demands of beginning to learn individualized targets in our first set of, COIPs we call them. So a lot of our kiddos when they first start services are nonverbal. My son was nonverbal when he was diagnosed at 2.5. He's very verbal. He's very delayed. His IQ is 57, so he's very intellectually disabled. And I call him a full meal deal. He's not Asperger's, so those of you kind of are familiar with that sort of range of kids on the autism spectrum. My son is fully infected with ASD. He's got the double stereopathy, toe walking, and he's 6'5", and he's coming down and he's doing his thing. But he was nonverbal, and we had augmentative communication when he was little, and we worked on a COIC, so repeating spoken language. And with him, we used food reinforcers at the beginning because he didn't care about that car ramp. It was some sort of unfortunate torture when that thing came out. My son was not interested in those kinds of toys when he was little, and so we used food reinforcers. And so therapy after lunch, we made sure that we did language things. We were working on using food as reinforcers before lunch when we were deprived with regards to food because they were starting to get hungry, and so those food reinforcers worked. And then after lunch, we switched over to other things, these bubbles and spinners and that kind of stuff. And so you can switch that around as your needs go. The reasonable work. Regardless of how badly we want something, if it's too much work, we're not going to do it. Right? Or if the reward isn't sufficient. So if you said to me, hey Liz, I'll give you $10 if you do a cartwheel, I'm like, it's not going to happen. I'm 6'3", I got on a dress, no way, isn't going to happen. If you said, oh Liz, I'll give you $100, I'm like, still no. 1,000, I'm thinking, well maybe, let me get my shoes off, at least, maybe enough room. Does it have to be a full cartwheel, or is it quasi-cartwheel, like the half thing that's like completely non-gymnastic looking? Is that okay? You said I'm going to give you $1 million, I'm like, oh yeah, just let me tuck this in. I'm going to give it my best, right? So the reasonable amount of work, at first for $10, a cartwheel, forget it. That's way too much work in order to gain that reinforcer. You said $1 million, I'm like, yeah, dude, I'll try it several times until I get there, right? So we always are trying to balance that for our kids. What's a reasonable amount of expectation or reasonable amount of work to get access to that reward? We can fiddle around with that to kind of figure that out. But we also have to keep in mind when we set up systems. So my son's been on a token economy forever, like 15 years. He's been on a token economy, and he earns rewards at the end of the week for our expectation of doing the stuff he needs to do. And those expectations have changed over time. Now he's transitioning into his own suite in our house, and he's got to clean his toilet, and he's got to do which looks like this. I'm still working on it, right? But the expectations change year to year, week to week, month to month as the kiddos grow. But I have no plans whatsoever to remove that token economy. Some people are like, well, you get the token economy in, you get the token economy out. I'm like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So for him, it's working. We just change the expectations over time. But what we need to be careful with is what do we put in there for the reward at the end of the week? Because we'll get those kids that are like, oh, well last week I did it for the little Lego man that came in the little plastic bag for $2.99. Next week, I could hold out and I could get his little car for $10 for doing the same amount of work. I'm just going to refuse out of it. Oh, wait a minute. That worked okay. How about the spaceship? That's only 30 bucks. You know, kids will figure this out. Has anyone got one of these? They're like, up the ante, up the ante, up the ante. And you're like, wait, I'm not made of money. There's no way this is going to work. This is coming off the rails. That's because we haven't structured our environment. There should be no free ride. There's like no free access at home to stuff. That iPad, that television time, that computer time, that's all stuff that you earn. Right? It's not your iPad that I give to you at age 4 that you can have free access to. No, you can have that iPad because Mom is sunshine and rainbows and unicorns. And I have just blessed you with access to your iPad because I have said as Mom that you can do that. And because you've done all these other things for me. You come to the table and sat and had your lunch when I asked you to. You took your little plastic plate over to the sink when you finished your lunch and put it on the counter. And then isn't that great? And here you go. Here's access to the iPad for 15 minutes. Turn on my timer. Oh, let's look at the game. Let's do whatever. Right? So there isn't the need to build in these things all the time. And sometimes families think that. They're like, oh, well, there's no way I can't afford to keep buying new things each month, each week, each whatever. There's no need to do that. Right? Most homes have toys, most homes have TV, most homes have favorite videos. And what's nice about our population is they often like to watch the same video over and over. Who's in that boat? Yeah, you're gonna like those ones. Lego movie? How many people have seen the Lego movie more than once? Yeah, right? So we're in that for sure. So, and that works well. Yeah, we can watch the Lego movie at the end of the week. Wouldn't that be great? You're like poking your eyes out, but the kiddo's excited. Okay, even if the reward is proportional, there are other factors. The immediacy of the reward. How long do I have to wait to get it? And for some of our early learners, they don't understand that the waiting to get something, that, and you see the tantrum kind of ensues at that point. They don't understand how this is working. And so giving the reward quickly, like within half a second, or something that represents the reward, a token or a sticker or whatever that they can exchange, can really help with that. Because absolutely, for our early learners, they're like, I don't get what you're asking me to do. I don't get, when I just want the toy. How come you're holding up the toy? Because often what we do is we hold up the toy and we put some demand and they're reaching for the toy and you're like, oh, you still got the demand in place and they're not understanding what we asked. You're just being mean and they're, as far as they're concerned at this point, just give you the toy. Right? So that immediacy is a big factor there. Because as soon as they make the sound of the vocalization we want, as soon as they do the skill that we want, then we need to provide that. And the ratio strain, right? Too many. Often this is something that we have when we get on a roll. You're doing so awesome, I'm just going to ask one more. And then it goes down the hill and over and it catches fire and it's just awful, right? We get into this place called ratio strain, where we ask too many things in order to get the reward because we felt we were on a roll. We had that book out and they were pointing to the things and life seemed really great and we were rolling along and then all of a sudden it was like way too many. It's like way too many. And the contingency has to be linked. So the reward has to be linked to the activity that we're asking them to do. We started late, so I'm telling my story, so let's roll here. All right. This is just a little bit of the definitions for you guys. There'll be, and I mentioned that I'll give you guys the PDF to upload to the website so people can access it. So it'll have that on there.
And the video will be on our website as well with a link to YouTube.
There you go, in case you want to share it with your friends or. All right, awesomeness. All right, I already mentioned awesomeness. The reward has to be awesome. You have to be awesome. The toy by itself, the best reinforcers that you can choose are the ones that require you to do something. So bubbles, most of our kids will get that bubble stick out and they got it on their lips, right? Because they haven't quite figured out that's got to be a distance away. Or they blow it and it doesn't work, or they can't pucker to blow. So the bubbles are amazing. Spinning tops with the two pieces where you have to twist it on. Yeah, never give them the toppies. So you just twist it on and then push it, and then they can't resist but touch it, and then it's over. Shoot, right? Works for you because then you can use it again. So some of those toys that you have to be part of to make them work are really great to use as reinforcers. So we always want to pair ourselves with the delivery of the reinforcer, no free access. You have to be the source of all things good. Okay? Pairing yourself with a reinforcer is ideal by selecting things that are fun to have 2 or more people participate in. It's easier for little kids. Right? It's easy to get bubbles out, it's easy to get our spinning tops out, there's all kinds of light up toys, there's all kinds of Jack in the Box, we can do peekaboo games, we can do all kinds of stuff. What do we do with our teenagers? What do we do with our young adults? We tend to kind of back off over time with that age group. Right? We tend to be heavily involved in elementary school. I don't know how many times I was into the school when my son was in elementary school. I was putting up posters on the display boards. I was always in that school. It was like, yeah, I'm here. We had 40 hours a week of intervention when he was little. So we are totally involved. And he got to middle schools, like, I went to the IEP meeting, and I think I went and hawked a few hot dogs here and there. But really, over time, you kind of become a little bit more removed as your child gets older. And in some ways, that's good because you're trying to build independence and you're tired. Those kind of things come into play. Let's be a little bit honest. I'll mess that up. And so you let other people take a little bit of responsibility. But then you back off as the fun factor at home. And so when your kiddo comes home with their homework, and you're like, it's time to do homework, and they're like, no. Right? How do we deal with that? So what do we do to establish right away things that are good for our teens? Movie nights is an easy one to put into place. Right? And game nights, board games. Board games are fantastic on a whole variety of ways. Right? Yeah, this is good old board games. Some of my best memories as a kid are like playing Monopoly with my family kind of stuff. But there are so many language-based games where we can sneak in learning when our kiddo doesn't quite realize that that's what we're doing. It's awesome to have some sort of family game night where you're working on language and communication and turn taking and all that kind of stuff. And even for our older kids, it's social skills games where we're working on rules or role playing and practice and all this kind of stuff. So there's lots of opportunities with a family to sneak in learning, even though it is a reinforcing fun time because the way the games are packaged nowadays. Game night as well, things like Wii or video games. I don't mind video games, but they should be those active kind of ones. We're going to talk a little bit about screen time and videos and that kind of stuff as we kind of go along. But game night, if you want to have family game night where everyone's playing Wii bowling, that's great. I think that's something that they can do with their kids. All right, I've been talking for a bit, so we're just going to take a second here. I'm going to give like a minute or two. You can brainstorm with the people sitting next to you, and then we're just going to do a call out. So what we want is devise a list of reinforcing activities that can be done with different age groups that involve 2 or more people. I don't care which age group you pick. You have to decide with your partner as to what age group that you pick. But let's take a minute or two and come up with a little bit of a list of activities for your age group.